Tonight we're talking about the Second World War, and particularly why is there still this obsession with the way that we blew each other's brains out 27 years ago, a bit longer actually, 32 to 27 years ago. Russell Braddon, the author, who had some experience of war in the Far East, was just telling me whether or not everybody in the forces, or a large number of people, thought the thing was worth fighting. Russell, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go on.
As I say, I can't answer for everybody, but certainly there were an enormous number of people who volunteered to go to the war because they thought they were fighting for something and against something that should be fought against. And no amount of complaint that today we're obsessed with people blowing one another's brains out can get away from that. We did say, and we risked having our own brains blown out, which is more than a considerable number of protesters do nowadays.
Can I
Nicholas Tomlin on the front row here. Yeah.
I think the Second World War was the most worthwhile war possibly that has ever been fought. It was fought against Hitler's fascism and indeed Japanese fascism, and it succeeded. I think it is a good thing that we are still obsessed by this war, because I think the other forms of violence that appear on our screen, and like it or don't like it, everybody does seem to like violence, does seem to be entertained by violence, and the various media do give us violence. If we're going to have violence, let us not have hangings, let us not have criminal violence, let us not have terrorist violence. Let's have a nice, far away moral violence, that is to say, the Second World War.
How far away was that supposed to be?
It's Claire Rayner on the second row.
I'm sorry,
there.
I was one of the kids they were supposed to be fighting a war for. You know, it was all for the children. I was 8 when it started. And all I know was that the whole thing was ghastly and awful for us. We inherited a messy world that we had nothing to do with. In fact, we suffered a great deal at the hands of the people at home who kept telling us how grateful we ought to be that everyone was out there fighting for us. Now, as I see it, the obsession with the last war is legitimate, and it should go on, because one shouldn't forget too quickly just what people can do to each other. I mean, God damn it, we've got it still going on now. Let's not pretend we haven't got a war going on all over the place.
We can do worse to each other these days.
Yes, indeed.
Can I take the question down to Leonard Cheshire on the front row here? I would have thought that as a result of reading about you over the last 20 years or so, that you had at some time very serious doubts in your mind about whether the war as war was a thing we were fighting. Were we fighting about anything really important?
Are we distinguishing between war in general or that war?
The Second World War.
Well, can I start by saying that, in my view, the last thing we want is violence. That what we've got to do is to go to the absolute limit to solve any problem peacefully, to understand the other man, to be able to make sacrifices. The reason we were involved in the last war was because Britain as a nation, its government, its civil servants, would not face up to the reality of Hitler. Now, Hitler had determined and declared openly from 1933 that he intended to colonize Europe. And he said it could not be done without war, and his instruments were fear and violence and terror. And in 1939, due to our ineptness, that we would not face up to it, there he was with an overwhelming power. So either you let him go on destroying people in his concentration camps and occupy the whole of Europe, or you stood up to him. To me, at that stage, there was nothing to be done but to stand up to him. But the tragedy to me is that we were so locked up in our own little domestic affairs, we couldn't see what was happening abroad. We were too self-centered. And I think the same thing is happening today. Only today it's not a Hitler, but it's poverty, it's injustice over the world. And because we don't see it, we're going to bring back on ourselves, in my opinion, the seeds of more violence.
Are the lessons, therefore, for this new war that you see to be drawn from a study of that war?
Well, we should see, I think, the price that was paid to the ordinary man who had no responsibility for this war at all. He was the man who suffered. He's the man who really hasn't got the recognition. He suffered all of this because we, as a country, and those who led us, were not sufficiently aware of what was happening outside. And I do really think that if we look at that, we can learn what may happen to our next generation if we don't do something to put right the injustices, whether at home or more especially further afield today.
All right, I'll come back to you in a moment, Mr. Cheshire. Jonathan, Mr. Green over there, is it Jonathan?
Yes.
Yes, it is indeed. I don't think you're in favour of war at all, and I would think most people here aren't. What are your objections to our present obsession?
Present obsession is, forgive my cynicism, an inevitable obsession because war will sell. I mean, violence is always fun. Lord Longford has got away with it because pornography, when it comes down to it, is sexual violence as far as he sees it. Sexual violence is rather grubby. Criminal violence is illegal. Nothing like a good war, because war, as Nick Tomlin said, is conveniently 25, 30 years away. It's nice and moral. After all, we even won, which is something England does so rarely for a lot of people these days. War will sell. It's useful. We have books called, well, children's comics have always Captain Guts or somebody, and then there's the War Picture Story Library. And this, I mean, I had this when I was young, and the children now have it. And I see no reason why commercially minded people will not reproduce it ad infinitum.
Yes, but you do remember what Leonard Cheshire said, that looking at the situation, he felt, and as Russell Braddon pointed out, an awful lot of people did feel, that that particular war had to be fought. Do you belittle their efforts fighting it?
No, not at all. I'm Jewish, so as much as anybody I can appreciate that that war was necessary to be fought. Without that, I should not be here. But nevertheless, I'm talking about now, and I think this programme is about the obsession with war, and to me that is a commercially gainful proposition. Give them war, it's a lot of fun. I mean, war films, what else do we have? As is probably obvious, I mean, should be, I was not a participant. I might have been an indirect result, but nevertheless, I sort of grown up. War films, great, go and see The Dirty Dozen, see thousands of people slain. I can't deny it, I enjoyed it immensely, but it was just conditioning me.
Well, in a sense, Jim Perry over there, at the far end of the row, as creator and co-author of Dad's Army, could be said to be making money out of the last war, and yet I don't suppose you enjoyed much of your experience in it, did you?
Well, no, I thought it was terrible. But the point is, what people don't realise, 1940, you know, we were in a corner. Somebody had a knife to our throats. There's no question of doing anything but fighting. I was on Barnes Common, 1940, with an old Vickers machine gun with no ammunition. And I was 16, and an old veteran from the 14-18 war, be about my age, I suppose. And I said, what are we going to do if the Germans come, Corp? He said, you'll do what you're bleeding well told, young man. I said, well, we haven't got any ammunition. He said, trust me, you'll be all right, lad, you'll be all right. And that's, you know, this is the attitude, but we had no alternative. But looking back, it was horrible, and any war is horrible. But we had our backs in the corner, and Hitler had a knife to our throat, and we had no alternative, and there was no question of anybody giving in at that time.
But can I take you back to Jonathan Green's point? War sells, and you can be said to be selling that war.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that Dad's Army is perhaps the only war series without any violence. There is no violence whatsoever in any episode of Dad's Army. They never meet any Germans, and it deals with the conditions of the civilian population and the people in the Home Guard, of which, until I tackled it, nobody had written anything about. And the situation and the rationing and the hardships and the bombing that they had to put up with, and the humour that arises from their frustrations. They can't get any food, they can't get any petrol, and that's mainly what Dad's Army is about. There's no violence in it whatsoever.
Well, I'd like to come to some of the people who actually did sit at home and suffer, and I'll come to you, Mrs. Irwin, in a moment. But I wonder whether we've got 3 sixth formers here, I wonder if any of you, do you find Dad's Army as funny as I do, for example? It's about something that happened, what, 20 years before you were born? 30 years? I don't know. What about you, Andy Trope?
Yeah, I think it is quite comical, but, you know, still war is senseless, you know. And people over there said that we fought our war for, you know, against fascism, you know, for democracy. Yet, you know, 25 years after the war, and still, you know, it's a fascist state in Spain, you know. It's
not really a threat to Europe in the same way that Hitler's Germany was.
No, but I'm saying, that, you know, there still is fascism. You know, we're supposed to have fought against fascism. You know, for democracy. Yet there is, you know, a fascist.
Do you watch war films?
No, I don't agree with war films. You know.
You've never enjoyed a war film?
Oh.
You have? A sixth former behind you?
Yes, I always enjoy a war film.
Why?
Well, I just find it interesting, you know.
What do you find interesting about it?
Well, action. And
yeah.
Would they like us to go to war against Spain?
Well, this is the point I was about to put to him. I mean, are you fascinated by it because you missed it?
Yes.
Yes. Would you like to go to war against Spain? Is this something that's missing in youth today? I mean, let's put the really brutal question: do we need wars every now and then to purge all the evil in ourselves? Do we?
And talk, maybe we could
on the third row, we've got Mrs. Cohen there.
if the politicians would get round the table and talk a little bit more, maybe we could avoid some of these wars, because a lot of them are unnecessary. It's just where politicians are pig-headed and will not agree on things.
I'm sure it's more complicated than that, Mrs. Coe. I'm sure.
Nicholas
Tomlin on the front row.
Beginning.
Nicholas Tomlin here on the front row, Claire. I'll come
As a
back to you.
matter of fact, we are less likely to have a really major world war at this moment in our history than we have for the past 20 years, less likely than any other time in this century. And this has actually been achieved by those same politicians talking round tables. And I think this has got to be realised by people. We have horrible, obscene wars going on, but they are minor ones, and they are better than global wars.
Well, with due respect, I think it's been achieved by the fact we got an atom bomb, and therefore that the politician is afraid of it. In the past, he could send armies out, and the armies fought, and he sat behind. Now he knows that the total country's involved and that we'll all go under. That, I mean, human nature's good and it's bad, but it does react to threats.
I would not disagree with that.
Can I get back to the
Claire
point?
Rayner is dying to speak. If she doesn't, she'll burst.
I
Go on.
will. Look, we're supposed to be here to find out why this obsession
Yeah, well,
is
that's what I thought we were trying to find out.
Well, look, it is within the living memory of a large number of people in this country, just far enough away for the worst of the pain to have gone off. It doesn't hurt quite so much. Just far enough away to be history. You can't expect people who lost, in many ways, 6 years of their lives to just throw it away and forget all about it. For me, they were 6 very formative, very important, and very powerful years, and I'm damned if I'm going to forget it.
Claire Rayner, a personal note.
Yeah.
I produced a programme called All Our Yesterdays, which during the period I was producing, it was all about the war. And we got a very big mailbag, and a vast proportion of that mailbag was from youngsters who had no memory whatsoever of it. What was fascinating about the war to them?
Because it was their parents' war. I mean, it's not that far away. My kids say to me, what was it like to be little when you were little, Mummy? So I say, I was a kid in a war, you know.
Yeah. Leslie Scott here, you...
A point Claire made there, that people who lost 6 years of their lives in the war can't readily forget it. But my experience is, and I have to do with old comrades associations, men who fought in the last war and the 1418 war, and I find their interest is waning. They're not very interested in the war anymore. We have reunion dinners, the numbers have dropped, and when we get together, we don't seem to talk about the war very much.
But the Second World War industry is ever more profitable. Who then is spending the money? Where's the interest?
These kids here are as bloodthirsty, twice as bloodthirsty as we ever were, because there isn't a prospect of a war coming along to them. They really are. They're nice, peaceful children, but they're very bloodthirsty.
Let's have, since the microphone's there, let's have next to Russell Brad and Rosie Boycott. What do you say to that?
But that's something, I mean, that my parents' generation have always said to me, that, I mean, I was involved in the underground press, the alternate culture, that, you know, one of the reasons why you're doing it is you've got nothing to unite you. What you need is a good wall.
Oh, no.
That you need this to pull the country together, and everyone is falling apart because there's no common purpose. And a lot of people seem to see that a war would be the ultimate solution, which is very sick.
Yes. Oh, well, I don't think many do that.
Well, I mean, it's been said to me.
I think that Jonathan's got a very good point. I do think that a lot of the films, a lot of the books give a false aspect of war. They've glamorized it. And we look upon the people who fought it as, we see them as quite different people, in my humble opinion, from what they were. And I'm particularly interested in knowing what people really were like. They were the same generation as today. We longed for peace. We had our own jobs. We wanted to get on with our own careers. War hit us. We weren't perpetually fighting like you see in films. We weren't perpetually with a stiff upper lip. We were frightened, we were bored, we were taken out of our environment. And I think that we've got a full, and insofar as films and books give this picture, it is harmful, because it presents that generation as militaristic, bloodthirsty, and all the rest.
Which we certainly weren't. But most people, surely, Mr. Cheshire, see far more real war film on the newsreels every day and know it is a bloody, awful, horrible affair. And yet the interest in the Second World War is soaring.
Well, perhaps because it was more cut and dried, it was more black and white. I imagine that's it. I don't know. There was a sense of national destiny, perhaps. I don't know. But I don't think we should deduce from that that the people who fought that war wanted to fight. We didn't.